down to his last $100, and living out of his weathered pickup truck after losing his construction company in a devastating lawsuit, Nathan Parker made a desperate decision to buy an abandoned farm at a rural county auction that no one else seemed interested in. What he discovered hidden beneath the crumbling property would not only change his life forever, but would uncover a historical secret that had remained buried since the birth of our nation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Nathan stared at his bank balance on his phone. $1,238.47. Just 16 months ago, he had been a successful small business owner with a thriving construction company, a comfortable suburban home, and a retirement account that promised security in his later years. Now, at 45, he was essentially homeless, showering at truck stops and carefully rationing every dollar. The collapse had come swiftly and mercilessly. A client had sued Nathan's company over alleged structural defects in a commercial project. Defects that Nathan knew weren't his team's fault, but were the result of the client's own cost-cutting demands. The lawsuit dragged on for months, draining Nathan's resources until he couldn't afford to keep fighting. The final judgment had been devastating. His business insurance hadn't covered the full claim, his personal assets were seized, and his reputation in the industry was shattered. "You need to accept reality and move on," his brother Alex had told him during their last tense phone call. "Come stay with us in Chicago until you get back on your feet. It's not charity, it's family." But Nathan couldn't bring himself to accept that offer. His pride, the same determination that had helped him build his company from nothing, wouldn't allow him to admit complete defeat. He needed to find his own way back. As he sat in his truck in the parking lot of the Willow Creek County Courthouse, Nathan noticed a flyer for an upcoming property auction. Most of the listings were foreclosed homes with starting bids well beyond his meager savings, but one property caught his eye, an abandoned farm on the outskirts of Harpersville with a minimum bid of just $1,000. The description wasn't promising. 75-acre property with dilapidated farmhouse and outbuildings, significant structural issues, no utilities currently connected, sold as is. Accompanying photos showed a weathered two-story farmhouse with peeling paint, broken windows, and a partially collapsed porch. The surrounding land was overgrown, with fields reclaimed by nature and boundary fences long since fallen. Nathan had grown up in a farming community before leaving for college and the construction industry. He had sworn never to return to rural life, to the isolation and endless work of maintaining land. But now, with winter approaching and his options dwindling, even a rundown farmhouse seemed better than continuing to live in his truck. The next morning, Nathan arrived at the auction early, studying the property details more carefully. The farm had been abandoned for nearly 15 years, according to the paperwork. It had belonged to the Harmon family for generations before. The last owner, Eleanor Harmon, had passed away with no direct heirs. The county had eventually seized the property for unpaid taxes. When the auctioneer called the Harmon farm, his tone was almost apologetic. Next up, the Harmon property on Old Mill Road, 75 acres, farmhouse and outbuildings, starting. Bid $1,000. The room remained silent. A few potential buyers exchanged glances, but no one raised their bid cards. "Anyone interested in this property? 75 acres, folks. That's less than $20 an acre." After an uncomfortable pause, Nathan raised his bid card. "1,000, he called out, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. The auctioneer seemed surprised, but quickly recovered. "I have $1,000. Do I hear 1,100? Nathan scanned the room, half expecting someone to outbid him, but the silence continued. "Going once, going twice. Sold to bidder number 47 for $1,000. Just like that, Nathan Parker became a landowner again. As he signed the paperwork and transferred nearly all his remaining money, the county clerk gave him a curious look. "You know the Harmon place has been sitting empty for years, right? Eleanor was the last of them. Folks around here say that land's got history, not all of it good." "History doesn't scare me," Nathan replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Every piece of land has a story." "Well, this one's got more stories than most," the clerk muttered, sliding a set of old-fashioned keys across the counter. "These probably don't even work anymore, but they came with the property file." As Nathan drove the 20 miles to his new property, doubt began to creep in. What had he done? He knew construction, but restoring a century-old farmhouse was a different challenge entirely. And what would he do with 75 acres of land? He had no farming equipment, no seeds, no livestock, no plan beyond simply having a roof over his head. When he turned onto Old Mill Road, the reality of his purchase hit him full force. The driveway was barely visible, overrun with weeds and young saplings that scraped against the sides of his truck. The farmhouse itself stood on a slight rise, silhouetted against the afternoon sky, looking even more desolate than in the photos. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Welcome home," Nathan muttered to himself as he parked in front of the house. The front door was swollen with moisture and required a forceful push to open. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with dust. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath his feet, and cobwebs draped from the ceiling like ghostly curtains. What furniture remained was covered in sheets, now grey with decades of dust. In what must have been the living room, a stone fireplace dominated one wall. The kitchen beyond contained an ancient cast-iron stove and cabinets with doors hanging from rusted hinges. A narrow staircase led to the second floor, where Nathan found 3 bedrooms with sagging floors and water-stained ceilings. As the sun began to set, Nathan returned to his truck to retrieve his sleeping bag and the plastic tote containing his remaining possessions. He chose the downstairs living room for his first night, setting up near the fireplace. After a dinner of beef jerky and a granola bar, he sat by the window, watching darkness settle over his property. In the silver light of the moon, the overgrown fields took on an eerie beauty. The distant line of trees that marked the property boundary swayed gently in the autumn breeze. Despite everything, his financial ruin, the daunting task ahead, the uncertain future, Nathan felt a strange sense of peace. "This is mine," he whispered to the empty house, "and I'm going to bring it back to life." Morning arrived with shafts of sunlight streaming through the broken windows, illuminating swirling dust motes in golden light. Nathan woke stiff and cold, but with a renewed determination. He had made his choice, and now he had to make it work. First, he needed to assess what he was dealing with. The house, while dilapidated, had a solid foundation. The roof needed significant work, but the main support beams appeared intact. With his construction background, Nathan could evaluate the structural issues with a professional eye. The most immediate concerns were securing the roof before winter and getting the utilities reconnected. Outside, he discovered a hand-pumped well, that, after considerable effort, still yielded water. The barn, though sagging in places, could be stabilized. Several smaller outbuildings were beyond salvation, but their materials could be salvaged for repairs elsewhere. By midday, Nathan had created a mental inventory of urgent repairs and a rough timeline for completing them. He would need supplies, which meant spending some of his dwindling funds, but his construction knowledge would save him from hiring help. As he explored the overgrown property further, Nathan discovered an old orchard with apple trees gone wild, but still producing fruit. Beyond that, the remains of a vegetable garden, now overtaken by weeds. With proper care, these could again become productive. The land had potential. It just needed someone willing to invest the time and effort to reclaim it. Nathan spent the afternoon clearing debris from the farmhouse, removing rotted furniture and sweeping out decades of dust. In the kitchen, he discovered a trapdoor in the floor, likely leading to a root cellar. It was secured with a rusted padlock, which he made a note to deal with later. By evening, he had cleared enough space to set up a more comfortable sleeping area and had even managed to repair one of the broken windows with materials he found in the barn. It wasn't much, but it was progress. As the sun set on his second day at the Harmon farm, Nathan sat on the repaired front porch step, eating an apple from the orchard and contemplating the magnitude of what lay ahead. The task was enormous, perhaps impossible for one person with limited resources, but he felt more alive than he had in months. Here, there were no lawyers, no accusatory clients, no pitying friends, just the land, the house, and the work that needed doing. Nathan settled into a routine over the next few days. He woke at dawn, worked until dusk, and fell into exhausted sleep each night. He made trips into town for essential supplies, carefully budgeting his remaining money. At the local hardware store, his construction knowledge earned him respect, and the owner, Frank Delaney, offered him credit when he explained his situation. "The Harmon place, huh?" Frank had said, whistling low. "That's going to be quite a project. Eleanor was bedridden those last few years. Place hasn't had proper maintenance since old William died. Must be 20 years now." "Did you know them?" Nathan asked, curious about the previous owners. "Everyone knew the Harmons," Frank replied. "One of the oldest families in the county. Settled here before the Revolution, if you believe the stories. Eleanor was the last of them. Never married, no children." He paused, studying Nathan. People wondered what would happen to the place after she passed. Some thought the Historical Society might take an interest, given the family's connection to the founding of Willow Creek. "What connection was that?" Frank shrugged. "Local. Legend says a Harmon fought alongside Washington, came back with some kind of commendation. There's a monument in the town square that mentions the family. Eleanor used to give talks about it at the Historical Society meetings, kept a lot of old family documents and such." This information added a new dimension to Nathan's property. He wasn't just restoring an old farm, he was preserving a piece of local history. The thought gave his work additional meaning. On his 7th day at the farm, with the most urgent roof repairs completed and a small generator providing limited electricity, Nathan turned his attention to the locked root cellar. He had discovered in the kitchen. The padlock, rusted and weathered, broke easily with a few strikes from a hammer. The trapdoor creaked as Nathan lifted it, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. With flashlight in hand, he made his way down carefully, testing each step. The cellar was larger than he expected, with stone walls and a packed earth floor. Wooden shelves lined the walls, still holding ancient preserving jars with contents long since spoiled. As his flashlight beam swept the room, Nathan noticed something odd about the back wall. Unlike the other 3 walls, which were made of roughly cut stone, this one appeared more deliberately constructed, with carefully fitted blocks. In the center, one stone protruded slightly. Curious, Nathan approached the wall, examining the protruding stone more closely. It was different from the others, smoother, with what looked like a deliberate carving on its face. As he brushed away decades of dust, a symbol emerged, an eagle with 13 stars above it. Nathan pressed the stone, and to his astonishment, it moved inward with a grinding sound. The section of wall beside it shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap. Heart racing, Nathan pushed against the wall section, which swung inward like a door, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. The beam of his flashlight illuminated a small room, perhaps 8 feet square, with a low ceiling. Against one wall stood a wooden desk with a chair, and above it, a shelf holding what appeared to be leather-bound books. In the center of the room was an old wooden chest, its brass fittings tarnished but intact. Nathan stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. A hidden room beneath a root cellar in an abandoned farmhouse. It was like something from a movie, not real life. Yet here it was, apparently untouched for decades, perhaps centuries. With trembling hands, Nathan approached the desk. On its surface lay a leather portfolio, cracked with age but still intact. He opened it carefully, revealing yellow documents covered in faded, elegant handwriting. The date on the top page read, April 17th, 1778. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. These were documents from the Revolutionary War period, genuine historical artifacts hidden away in a secret room on his property. He turned his attention to the chest, which was secured with a simple iron latch rather than a lock. Inside, he found more documents, rolled maps tied with faded ribbons, and several small leather-bound books. With growing excitement, Nathan selected one of the books and opened to the first page. The personal journal of Colonel James Harmon, aide-de-camp to General Washington, commenced January 1st, 1777. The name struck a chord. Harmon, the same as the family who had owned this farm for generations. This wasn't just any revolutionary or journal. It was written by the ancestor of the very people who had lived here. As Nathan carefully flipped through the pages, phrases jumped out at him. General W. confided today his concerns regarding the traitor Arnold. The winter at Valley Forge tests men's souls as surely as Mr. Payne wrote, "Today I was entrusted with documents of such sensitivity that their discovery by the enemy would surely doom our cause." With sudden clarity, Nathan understood what he had found. This hidden chamber was a Revolutionary War bunker, a secure location where sensitive documents had been stored, and the journal belonged to a founding father, perhaps not one of the most famous, but undoubtedly a man who had stood alongside Washington during America's fight for independence. The magnitude of the discovery left Nathan breathless. These documents and artifacts had been hidden here for nearly 2.5 centuries, their existence apparently known only to generations of the Harmon family who had preserved and protected them through the years. As Nathan carefully returned the journal to the chest, his flashlight beam caught something else, a portrait in a tarnished frame hanging on the wall opposite the desk. It showed a man in a Revolutionary War uniform, his expression stern but intelligent, with the name Colonel James Harmon inscribed on a small brass plate at the bottom of the frame. Looking into the painted eyes of the man whose journal he had just held, Nathan felt a profound connection across time, a responsibility to preserve what he had discovered. This wasn't just his property anymore. It was a piece of American history that had been entrusted to his care. With newfound purpose, Nathan carefully closed the secret door, ensuring the hidden chamber remained secure. He would need to approach this discovery methodically, to document everything properly before deciding how to proceed. But one thing was certain. The abandoned farm he had purchased out of desperation had just become infinitely more valuable than he could have ever imagined. As Nathan climbed the cellar stairs, his mind raced with questions. Who exactly was Colonel James Harmon? How significant were these documents to American history? And why had the Harmon family kept them hidden for so long, apparently sharing their existence with no one outside the family line? Whatever the answers, Nathan knew his life had just changed irrevocably. The man who had arrived at this abandoned farm with nothing but a pickup truck and a sleeping bag now possessed something beyond price, a direct connection to the founding of America and the responsibility that came with it. The next morning, Nathan woke with the first light, his mind still processing the discovery of the hidden chamber. The immediate question was what to do next. These weren't just valuable historical artifacts, they were potentially of national importance. He couldn't simply keep them to himself, but he also needed to be careful about how he proceeded. The local historical society seemed like a logical first step, but Nathan hesitated. What if they tried to claim the documents? What if news of the discovery brought unwanted attention to the farm before he was ready? He needed more information before making any decisions. Nathan drove into town, heading for the Willow Creek Public Library. The small building housed a local history section, which might contain information about the Harmon family and their role in the Revolutionary War. The librarian, an elderly woman named Margaret Wilson, brightened when Nathan mentioned he had purchased the Harmon farm. The Harmon place. My goodness, that's quite an undertaking. Eleanor was a dear friend. Such a shame to see that beautiful property fall into disrepair after she passed. Margaret studied Nathan with keen interest. What made you decide to buy it? Nathan gave his now practiced response about looking for a fresh start, then steered the conversation toward the property's history. I understand the Harmons were one of the original families in this area. Margaret nodded enthusiastically. Oh yes, they came here in 1773. James Harmon was granted the land by the colonial governor for services rendered. After the Revolution, the grant was confirmed by the new state government. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. There's always been talk that James Harmon was more important to the revolutionary cause than history books record. Eleanor certainly believed so. What kind of talk? Nathan asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Well, Eleanor claimed that her ancestor was part of Washington's inner circle, not just a soldier, but a confidant. She said he was entrusted with sensitive diplomatic missions and intelligence work. Margaret shrugged. Many local families have similar stories, exaggerating their ancestors' importance, but Eleanor did have quite a collection of family documents to support her claims. Do you know what happened to those documents after she died? A shadow crossed Margaret's face. That's a sad business. Eleanor's distant cousins from Boston came and cleared out the house after the funeral, took whatever they thought had value, including all the family papers Eleanor had so carefully preserved. They had no interest in the farm itself, just anything they could sell. The Historical Society tried to convince them to donate the documents, but they refused. She sighed. All that history probably sold to private collectors by now. Nathan felt a surge of excitement. The cousins had cleared the house, but they hadn't known about the hidden chamber. The documents they had taken were likely just the ones Eleanor had kept in the open, perhaps copies or less sensitive materials. The most important artifacts had remained safely concealed in their centuries-old hiding place. That's a shame, he said, managing to sound appropriately disappointed. I was hoping to learn more about the property's history. Margaret brightened. Well, we do have some materials here. Eleanor donated copies of certain family documents to our collection, and there's a biography of James Harmon that a local historian wrote in the 1950s. She led Nathan to a shelf in the local history section and pulled out a thin volume. It's not comprehensive, but it might be a start. Nathan spent the rest of the morning reading about James Harmon. According to the biography, Harmon had been a successful merchant before the Revolution, with connections to both Philadelphia and Boston. He had joined Washington's forces in 1776 and quickly rose to the rank of colonel due to his organizational skills and trustworthiness. After the war, he had settled permanently on his land grant in what would become Willow Creek, founding the town and serving as its first mayor. What the biography didn't mention was any role as Washington's aide-de-camp or involvement with sensitive documents. Either the biographer hadn't had access to that information, or those aspects of Harmon's service had been deliberately kept out of public record. On his way back to the farm, Nathan stopped at the hardware store to pick up more supplies. Frank Delaney was chatting with another customer when Nathan entered, a well-dressed man in his 60s who carried himself with an air of authority. "Nathan, just the man we were talking about," Frank called out. "Senator Phillips here was just asking about the Harmon place. I told him you'd recently purchased it." The senator extended his hand. "Richard Phillips, I represent this district in the state senate. The Harmon farm is quite a landmark around here." Nathan shook his hand, immediately wary. "Nathan Parker. It's a major renovation project, but I'm making progress." "I'm sure you are." Phillips smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've always had a special interest in that property. The Harmon family has deep connections to our state's history. In fact, I've been working on legislation to create a heritage corridor along Old Mill Road, preserving properties with historical significance." "That sounds like a worthwhile project," Nathan replied carefully. "It is. The state would offer tax incentives to property owners who agree to maintain historical standards, with the option for the state to purchase properties of particular importance." Phillips handed Nathan a business card. "Once you've settled in, I'd love to discuss the Harmon Place's role in the project, perhaps even arrange a tour. I haven't been inside that house since Eleanor's funeral." After the senator left, Frank gave Nathan a meaningful look. "Phillips has been trying to get his hands on the Harmon property for years. Offered to buy it from Eleanor more than once, but she always refused. Word is, his family and the Harmons have some kind of historical beef going back generations." This information added another layer of complexity to Nathan's situation. What was Senator Phillips's real interest in the property? And what would he do if he learned about the hidden chamber and its contents? As Nathan drove back to the farm, he could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The weather matched his mood, increasingly unsettled as he considered the implications of his discovery and the sudden interest from a state senator. Back at the farmhouse, Nathan retrieved Colonel Harmon's journal from the hidden chamber and began reading it more carefully, starting from the beginning. The early entries detailed Harmon's experiences with Washington's army, the hardships of campaign life, the challenges of inadequate supplies, the moments of despair, and flashes of hope. As he continued reading, however, the journal revealed something unexpected. James Harmon hadn't just been a military officer, he'd been involved in intelligence operations, carrying messages between Washington and various agents, including those in British-occupied territories. The journal mentioned coded communications, secret meetings, and information smuggled across enemy lines. One passage in particular caught Nathan's attention. April 3, 1778. "Today I was entrusted with documents of such sensitivity that General W. has ordered me to create a secure repository for them, known only to myself. These papers containing, as they do, the names of our agents in British territory and details of our French alliance negotiations, would cause incalculable damage should they fall into enemy hands. I have decided that my land grant in the Western Territory will serve this purpose well, being remote yet accessible to trusted couriers." So the hidden chamber had been created specifically as a secure location for Revolutionary War intelligence documents. This wasn't just a family hiding place, it was essentially an 18th century intelligence safe house. As Nathan continued reading, another disturbing pattern emerged. The journal made repeated references to someone called P, described as an ambitious rival who Harmon suspected of having divided loyalties. June 17, 1778, P continues to ingratiate himself with Jenna W., while simultaneously maintaining his connections to certain loyalist families. I have expressed my concerns, but without direct evidence, I cannot make formal accusations against a man of his standing. I must remain vigilant. The last entry in the journal, dated December 1, 1782, after the British surrender at Yorktown but before the final peace treaty, contained an ominous warning. I have reason to believe that P has discovered the existence of my document repository. Though the war is effectively won, the danger remains, as these papers implicate several prominent families in espionage activities. P's ambition knows no bounds, and I fear he seeks these documents not for patriotic reasons, but for the power they would give him over others. I have therefore created additional security measures and will entrust knowledge of this place only to my son, with instructions that it be passed down through the family line until such time as the revelations contained herein can do no harm to innocent parties. As Nathan closed the journal, the implications became clear. The Pede mentioned could well be an ancestor of Senator Phillips, explaining the long-standing interest in the Harmon property. If Phillips knew or suspected what might be hidden there, his desire to acquire the farm made perfect sense. The storm had arrived, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance. In the flickering light of the battery-powered lantern, Nathan made a decision. He couldn't keep this discovery entirely to himself, but he needed to approach it carefully, protecting both the historical artifacts and his own interests. He needed an ally, someone with expertise in historical documents who wasn't connected to local politics or families. And he needed to secure proof of what he had found before anyone else discovered the chamber's existence. Tomorrow, he would document everything in the hidden room, then reach out to a former client who taught American history at the State University. But tonight, as the storm raged outside the old farmhouse, Nathan sat with Colonel Harmon's journal in his hands, feeling a profound connection to the man who had created the hidden chamber nearly 2.5 centuries ago. A man who, like Nathan, had faced adversity and uncertainty, making difficult decisions that would echo through time. The abandoned farm that had been Nathan's desperate last resort now represented something far greater, a direct link to America's founding and a responsibility to ensure that Colonel Harmon's legacy was properly honored and preserved. Outside, lightning illuminated the overgrown fields in brilliant flashes, revealing the land as James Harmon might have first seen it, full of promise and possibility. Despite the complications his discovery had created, Nathan felt a growing sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, he was now part of this land's ongoing story, a story that he was beginning to realize was far more significant than he could have ever imagined. The morning after his discovery, Nathan awoke before dawn, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd found. The hidden chamber beneath the root cellar wasn't just an interesting historical footnote. It potentially changed the narrative of American history. Colonel James Harmon, according to his own journal, had been more than just a military officer. He'd been a confidant of Washington himself, entrusted with state secrets during the nation's fragile beginnings. Nathan made coffee using water from the hand pump and a small camping stove, then sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over his property. The golden light transformed the overgrown fields, making them look less like neglect and more like untamed possibility. In that moment of quiet reflection, Nathan made a decision. He would document everything in the hidden chamber before approaching anyone else. If this discovery was as significant as he believed, he needed to protect both the historical artifacts and his own interests. With renewed purpose, Nathan gathered supplies, his phone for photographs, a notebook for detailed descriptions, and gloves to handle the delicate documents. He descended again into the cellar, activated the hidden door, and entered the chamber with a sense of reverence. This time, he approached his exploration methodically, photographing each item in place before examining it more closely. The chest contained not just Colonel Harmon's journal, but several leather portfolios filled with documents. Some were clearly military communications with official seals and signatures. Others appeared to be personal correspondence between Harmon and various figures of the Revolutionary period. One letter, dated July 1777, caught Nathan's attention. It was from George Washington himself, thanking Harmon for services rendered at great personal risk, and mentioning a network of loyal patriots that Harmon had apparently organized. The language was carefully vague. Clearly these were sensitive intelligence operations, but the signature was unmistakable. "My God," Nathan whispered, carefully returning the letter to its portfolio. This wasn't just historically significant, it was priceless. As he continued his inventory, Nathan discovered maps with marked routes across British-held territories, coded messages with their translations, and lists of names with annotations about their reliability and access to information. Colonel James Harmon had been a spy master, running intelligence operations for Washington during the Revolution. Most intriguing was a slim volume bound in red leather with no external markings. Inside, Nathan found entries written in what appeared to be a simple substitution cipher. Unlike the journal, which detailed military movements and intelligence operations, this seemed more personal. Harmon's private thoughts about the men he served with, his assessments of their character and loyalty, and his concerns about divided loyalties among certain prominent families. Again and again, references to Pu appeared, a rival whom Harmon clearly distrusted. The final entry in the coded journal, dated 1783 after the war's end, contained an ominous warning. "Though victory is secured and our independence won, I fear the ambitions of certain men may yet threaten the republic we have sacrificed so much to create. P and those of his ilk view power not as a solemn responsibility, but as a prize to be seized. I have secured evidence of their communications with the enemy during our darkest hours. Evidence I cannot make public without reigniting. Conflicts best left settled. These documents will remain hidden until such time as they can be revealed without harm to our fragile nation. May God grant that day comes within my lifetime, though I fear it shall not." Nathan closed the book with trembling hands. Colonel, Harmon had apparently hidden evidence of treasonous activities by prominent revolutionary figures, possibly including ancestors of Senator Phillips, given his unusual interest in the property. No wonder the Harmon family had guarded this secret chamber through generations. By midday, Nathan had catalogued the chamber's contents as thoroughly as possible with his limited resources. Beyond the documents, he'd found several artifacts of the period: a Revolutionary officer's sword with the Harmon family crest, a flintlock pistol still in its case, and a small box containing Spanish gold coins, emergency funds perhaps for Harmon's intelligence operations. As Nathan carefully restored everything to its original position and secured the hidden door, he considered his next steps. He needed expert assistance, but approaching the wrong person could lead to the artifacts being seized or worse, disappearing into private collections. The historical value here went beyond monetary considerations. This was a significant missing piece of America's founding story. After securing the root cellar, Nathan drove to a nearby town where he wouldn't be recognized, found a cafe with Wi-Fi, and began researching. First, he looked up Senator Richard Phillips, finding numerous articles about the career politician's rise to power and his family's long history in the region. The Phillips family had indeed been prominent since colonial times, with Richard's ancestor, William Phillips, serving in the Continental Congress. Next, Nathan searched for experts in Revolutionary War history, specifically those specializing in intelligence operations. One name appeared repeatedly in scholarly articles: Dr. Eliza Winters, a professor at Harrington University about 90 miles away. According to her faculty profile, Dr. Winters had written extensively about Washington's spy networks and was currently working on a comprehensive study of intelligence operations during the Revolutionary period. Perfect. She had the expertise to authenticate the documents and assess their historical significance, and being from outside the immediate area, She was less likely to have connections to local politics or family rivalries. Nathan composed a careful email, describing himself as the new owner of a historic property who had discovered some Revolutionary War-era documents that might be of interest. He provided enough detail to establish credibility, but omitted any mention of the hidden chamber or the specific contents of Harmon's journals. Better to be cautious until he could assess Dr. Winters in person. As he waited for a response, Nathan visited the local historical society, a small building near the town square that housed exhibits on the area's development. A modest display about the Revolutionary period included a mention of Colonel James Harmon as a distinguished local citizen who served with honor under General Washington. There was no hint of Harmon's intelligence work or his close relationship with Washington, evidence that the family had kept these aspects of their ancestors' service private. An elderly volunteer approached as Nathan studied the display. "Interested in Revolutionary history?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Very much so," Nathan replied. "I'm particularly interested in Colonel Harmon. I understand his family was prominent in the area." "Oh yes, the Harmons were one of our founding families. James Harmon established the original settlement after the war. His descendants lived on that same property until Eleanor passed a few years back." The woman sighed. "Such a shame to see the old place sitting empty. The family home should have been preserved as a historical site, but without direct heirs, there was no one to champion the cause." "What about the Historical Society? Couldn't they have purchased the property?" "On our budget?" She laughed softly. "We barely keep the lights on here. Senator Phillips proposed having the state acquire it for preservation, but his bill stalled in committee. Budget concerns, supposedly, though Eleanor always said the Phillips family had their own reasons for wanting the Harmon place." "What reasons were those?" Nathan asked, trying to sound merely curious. The volunteer leaned closer. "Family rivalries run deep around here. According to Eleanor, the Harmons and the Phillips had some kind of falling out during the Revolution, something about divided loyalties and accusations that were never proven. She didn't share details, said some things were best left in the past." She straightened up, looking slightly embarrassed. "Listen to me, gossiping about families long gone. You'd think we didn't have anything more current to discuss in this town." Nathan smiled reassuringly. "History is always relevant. Actually, I recently purchased the Harmon property. I'm renovating the farmhouse." Her eyes widened. "You bought the Harmon place? My goodness, that's quite an undertaking." "It is, but I'm finding it rewarding. The house has good bones, and the land has potential." "Well, if you find any historical items during your renovation, I hope you'll consider donating them to our collection. We have so little from the colonial period. Most families kept their heirlooms private or sold them over the years." "I'll keep that in mind," Nathan promised, feeling a twinge of guilt at his evasiveness. The Historical Society was the logical place for Harmon's documents, but until he understood their full significance and the potential political implications, he couldn't risk bringing them to light prematurely. Returning to the farm that evening, Nathan found fresh tire tracks in his driveway. Someone had visited while he was gone. The farmhouse appeared undisturbed, but as he approached the barn, he noticed the door standing slightly ajar. He was certain he'd closed it that morning. Heart pounding, Nathan entered the barn cautiously. Nothing seemed immediately out of place, but he couldn't shake the feeling of intrusion. Had someone been looking for something specific? Or was it just curious locals checking out the property's new owner? As Nathan turned to leave, he noticed a business card tucked into a crack in one of the support beams. "Senator Richard Phillips." On the back, handwritten in blue ink, "Stop by to discuss the Heritage Corridor project. Call my office at your convenience." The seemingly innocent note felt like a warning. Phillips knew Nathan was exploring the property's history. Perhaps he even suspected the existence of the hidden chamber. The senator's interest was becoming increasingly concerning, especially in light of the rivalry between the families mentioned in Harmon's journal and by the Historical Society volunteer. That night, as a storm rolled in across the valley, Nathan received a reply from Dr. Winters. She expressed interest in the documents he'd mentioned and suggested meeting at her university office later that week. Her tone was professional, but enthusiastic, mentioning that primary sources from the Revolutionary period were rare and potentially valuable for her research. As lightning illuminated the farmhouse in brief, electric flashes, Nathan felt a growing sense that he'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple historical discovery. The abandoned farm he'd purchased out of desperation now connected him to centuries-old secrets, political rivalries, and potentially explosive historical revelations. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having washed the world clean. Nathan spent the day continuing his renovation work, focusing on the roof repairs that couldn't wait for winter. Physical labor helped clear his mind, allowing him to process everything he'd learned in the past 48 hours. By late afternoon, he had patched the most critical sections of the roof and was taking a well-deserved break when a pickup truck came up the driveway. It wasn't the sleek sedan Senator Phillips drove, but an older model with a local farm supply store logo on the door. A woman approximately Nathan's age stepped out, tall, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dressed in work clothes and mud-spattered boots. She approached with confident strides, carrying a small cardboard box. "You must be the new owner," she called as she neared the porch. "I'm Sarah Harker. My family's farm borders yours to the east." Nathan stood to greet her, suddenly conscious of his own disheveled appearance after hours of roofing work. "Nathan Parker, nice to meet you." "Thought I'd bring over a welcome gift," Sarah said, offering the box. "Garden vegetables, some preserves, and information about local suppliers. Getting started in a new place can be challenging." "That's incredibly kind, thank you," Nathan replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Would you like some water or coffee? I can't offer much else at the moment." Sarah accepted a glass of water, and they sat on the porch steps, looking out over the overgrown fields. "You've taken on quite a project," she observed. "Most people were surprised when the Harmon place finally sold. It needs a lot of work." "I'm in construction, or was," Nathan replied. "The renovation is within my capabilities, even if the farming side is new territory." "What brought you to Willow Creek? We don't get many newcomers, especially ones willing to take on abandoned properties." Nathan gave his standard answer, about looking for a fresh start, but something about Sarah's direct gaze made him add, "To be honest, I was down to my last resources. This place was what I could afford." Sarah nodded, seeming to appreciate his honesty. "Sometimes the best opportunities are the ones we're forced into." She gestured toward her own farm on the neighboring ridge, visible in the distance. "The Hocker farm wasn't my choice either. I was pursuing a career in agricultural science when my father had a stroke. Came back to run the family operation temporarily, and 5 years later, I'm still here." "Do you regret it?" Nathan asked. "Not anymore. There's something to be said for working your own land, being part of something with roots and history." She turned to study the farmhouse. "Speaking of history, the Harmon place has plenty. Eleanor used to give lectures about her family's role in founding Willow Creek." "So I've heard. The Historical Society has a small display about Colonel James Harmon." Something flickered in Sarah's expression. Interest, perhaps, or caution. Eleanor believed her ancestor was more significant than the official histories recorded. She was quite passionate about preserving his legacy. "Did you know her well?" "She was a friend of my grandmother's. Used to visit our farm occasionally when I was growing up." Sarah hesitated, then added, "She didn't trust many people with family matters. especially not the Phillips family. There's bad blood there going back generations. Nathan considered how much to reveal about his discoveries. Something about Sarah inspired confidence, but caution was still warranted. I've met Senator Phillips briefly. He seems very interested in this property. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Richard Phillips has been trying to get control of this land for years. Claims it's for historical preservation, but many locals suspect he has other motives. Such as? The heritage corridor he promotes would give the state authority to acquire properties through eminent domain if necessary. The Harmon Place would be a prime target given its historical significance. Would that be so terrible? If the property were preserved as a historical site? Sarah studied him thoughtfully. That depends on who controls the narrative. History isn't just facts. It's interpretation, emphasis, what's included and what's left out. The Phillips family has their version of local history, and the Harmons had theirs. She stood, brushing dust from her jeans. Just be careful about who you trust with any historical discoveries you might make during your renovation. Some people have agendas that go beyond preservation. After Sarah left, Nathan returned to the hidden chamber, this time with renewed purpose. If what Harmon's journal suggested was true, that P had committed treasonous acts during the revolution, then the Phillips family's interest in the property might indeed go beyond historical preservation. They might be seeking to control or even suppress information that could tarnish their ancestral legacy. One portfolio Nathan had overlooked in his initial catalogue contained correspondence between Harmon and various officials after the war. Several letters referenced an investigation into wartime profiteering and intelligence leaks that had endangered Continental forces. Though names were often abbreviated, WP appeared repeatedly as a subject of concern. William Phillips, likely Senator Richard Phillips' ancestor. A letter from 1784, written by Harmon to a fellow officer, stated, "Though evidence of W.P.'s communications with British intelligence is compelling, certain parties deem it imprudent to pursue charges at this delicate time. Our nation yet remains fragile, and revelations of such high-level betrayal might fracture the unity we have sacrificed so much to achieve. I have therefore secured all documentation in a location known only to myself, to be preserved until such time as the full accounting of our struggle can be revealed without endangering the Republic." Nathan sat back on his heels, the implications clear. Colonel Harmon had evidence that a founding father, a man whose descendants had risen to positions of political power, had secretly aided the British during the Revolution. The hidden chamber wasn't just a repository of historical documents. It contained potentially explosive information that could rewrite history and damage a powerful family's reputation. No wonder the Harmons had kept the chamber's existence secret for generations. No wonder Eleanor had refused to sell the property to Senator Phillips. And no wonder Phillips was so intent on acquiring the land now that the direct Harmon line had ended. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Nathan's shoulders. These weren't just valuable historical artifacts. They were a political powder keg that had remained unexploded for over 2 centuries. His discovery had made him the custodian of a secret that powerful people might go to great lengths to suppress. As the sun set over the Harmon farm, casting long shadows across the overgrown fields, Nathan carefully resealed the hidden chamber. He needed expert validation before proceeding, and his meeting with Dr. Winters couldn't come soon enough. But first, he had to ensure the chamber remained undisturbed and undiscovered by others who might be watching the property. That night, Nathan moved his sleeping bag to the kitchen, positioning himself where he could hear if anyone attempted to access the root cellar. The historical treasures hidden beneath his farm had survived for nearly 2.5 centuries. He was determined they would remain safe until he could determine the right course of action, one that would honor both Colonel Harmon's wishes and the historical truth, regardless of whose family legacy might suffer in the process. The abandoned farm that had seemed like his last desperate chance now represented something far greater, a responsibility to history itself, and perhaps in some small way to the completion of Colonel James Harmon's final mission. The next morning, Nathan implemented additional security measures. He installed battery-powered motion sensors at the property's entrance and near the farmhouse, a precaution that seemed prudent given Senator Phillips' uninvited visit and the historical significance of what lay hidden beneath the root cellar. While working on the front porch, Nathan spotted a familiar truck approaching, Sarah Harker returning. This time she carried a toolbox and offered to help with repairs. "Neighboring farms look out for each other around here," she explained, when Nathan expressed surprise at her generosity. "Besides, I've been curious about the inside of this place for years." Eleanor was pretty private in her later days. Having an extra pair of hands accelerated the work, and Sarah's knowledge of local resources proved invaluable. She knew which lumberyard offered the best prices, which parts of the property tended to flood in spring, even which local craftsmen might help with specialized restoration work. As they replaced rotted porch boards, Sarah shared stories about growing up next to the Harmon place. Eleanor was like a local historian, she recalled, used to give presentations at the school about the Revolutionary period. She always emphasized that history isn't just about famous names and big battles. It's about the people who worked behind the scenes, whose contributions often go unrecorded. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Nathan observed, carefully. Testing a new board, she was fiercely protective of her family's legacy, too. Whenever Senator Phillips or his father before him started talking about preserving the Harmon property, Eleanor would go on the offensive. She was convinced they wanted to control the narrative about the founding families. Nathan hesitated, then asked, "Do you know anything specific about the rivalry between the families?" Sarah paused in her work, considering the question. "Only what my grandmother mentioned. Apparently there were questions about William Phillips' loyalties during the Revolution, rumors that he hedged his bets by maintaining connections with both sides. Nothing was ever proven, but the suspicion created a rift between the families that never really healed." This aligned perfectly with what Nathan had read in Harmon's journal. Colonel Harmon had possessed evidence of William Phillips' treasonous communications, but had chosen not to make it public for the sake of the fragile new nation. Why would Senator Phillips care about allegations from over 200 years ago? Nathan wondered aloud. "Legacy matters to old families," Sarah replied, hammering a nail with practiced efficiency. "The Phillips have built their reputation on patriotic service dating back to the Revolution. Richard's campaign materials always mention his distinguished ancestor who stood with Washington in our nation's darkest hour. If that narrative were questioned, it might tarnish not just history, but current political standing." By late afternoon, they had completed the porch repairs and moved on to securing the barn door, which had been hanging precariously from one hinge. As they worked, Sarah occasionally glanced toward the farmhouse with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper. "Thank you for your help," Nathan said as they wrapped up for the day. "I'd have been at this for days on my own." "Happy to do it," Sarah replied, packing her tools, "though I'll admit to an ulterior motive. My graduate research focused on sustainable farming practices on historical properties. The Harmon place has been in continuous agricultural use since the 1770s. That kind of legacy is increasingly rare and worth preserving. You're welcome to visit any time," Nathan found himself saying, "Once I've got the house in better shape, I'd appreciate your insights on restoring the agricultural aspects of the property." Sarah smiled, the expression warming her practical demeanor. "I'd like that. And if you find anything interesting about the farm's history during your renovation, I'd be curious to hear about it. My family's been here almost as long as the Harmons. Our stories are intertwined." After Sarah left, Nathan checked his security measures, then returned to the hidden chamber for another examination of the documents. This time, he focused on a portfolio labeled Land Grants and Surveys, containing maps of the original Harmon property. To his surprise, the historical boundaries extended beyond the current 75 acres, encompassing parts of what was now the neighboring Harker farm and several other properties. A notation in Harmon's handwriting indicated that portions had been gifted to trusted associates after the war, including a substantial tract to Corporal David Harker, whose loyalty and discretion during our intelligence operations proved invaluable. Udum. So Sarah's ancestor had been part of Harmon's spy network during the Revolution. The connection between the families went deeper than mere neighbors. They had been allies in the Shadow War against the British, and apparently against internal threats like William Phillips. This new information cemented Nathan's growing trust in Sarah. Her family had been part of keeping the Harmon secrets for generations, perhaps without even knowing the full extent of what they were protecting. If Nathan needed a local ally, Sarah Harker seemed increasingly like the logical choice. The next day brought Nathan's scheduled meeting with Dr. Eliza Winters. He drove the 90 miles to Harrington University with a small selection of documents, enough to establish the authenticity and significance of his discovery without revealing everything. He had photographed the hidden chamber and its full contents, storing the images in an encrypted file as insurance. Dr. Winters's office reflected her academic focus. Bookshelves filled with Revolutionary War histories, framed maps of colonial America, and a glass case containing period artifacts. The professor herself was younger than Nathan had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses and an energy that suggested boundless intellectual curiosity. "Mr. Parker," she greeted him, extending her hand. "Thank you for reaching out. You mentioned discovering Revolutionary War documents at a property you've purchased." "Yes," Nathan replied, placing a protective folder on her desk. "I've brought a few samples for your assessment. They appear to be the papers of Colonel James Harmon, who served with Washington." Dr. Winters's eyes widened as she carefully examined the first document, a commission signed by Washington himself. "This appears authentic at first glance," she said, voice hushed with professional reverence. "May I ask how you came into possession of these?" Nathan provided a carefully edited version of his discovery, mentioning finding documents in the farmhouse but omitting the hidden chamber. Better to be cautious until he could fully assess Dr. Winters's intentions. As she examined more documents, her excitement grew visibly. "Mr. Parker, if these are authentic, and I believe they are, this is an extraordinary find." James Harmon has been a peripheral figure in revolutionary scholarship, mentioned in Washington's correspondence, but with few surviving papers of his own. She looked up at Nathan, eyes bright. "These could significantly expand our understanding of Washington's intelligence operations during the war. So they're historically significant?" "Extremely, particularly these references to counterintelligence activities and suspected loyalist sympathizers within the Continental leadership." She tapped a passage where Harmon discussed his concerns about WP without naming him fully. This suggests Harmon was involved in security operations at the highest levels. "What would be the proper way to handle such documents?" Nathan asked carefully. "I want to ensure they're preserved and studied appropriately." Dr. Winters leaned back, considering. "Ideally, They should be donated to an archive with proper preservation facilities, the National Archives, the Smithsonian, or a major university. Collection. They would be authenticated, conserved, digitized for research, and secured for posterity. And if they contain politically sensitive information, historical allegations that might reflect poorly on prominent families. A flash of understanding crossed Dr. Winter's face. Ah, you're concerned about potential pushback if these documents challenge established historical narratives. Something like that. She nodded thoughtfully. It's not an uncommon situation with historical discoveries. Many families have skeletons they'd prefer to keep buried, especially families with political connections. But from an academic perspective, historical truth takes precedence over protecting reputations, even after more than 2 centuries. History isn't just about the past, Mr. Parker. It shapes our understanding of the present. When we mythologize historical figures, create flawless founding fathers instead of acknowledging them as complex human beings with moral failings, we do a disservice to both history and current discourse. She gestured to the documents. Whatever these papers reveal, they're part of our national story and deserve to be studied honestly. Her answer reassured Nathan. Dr. Winters seemed genuinely committed to historical truth rather than political expediency. He decided to reveal a bit more. These are just a small sample, he admitted. There's significantly more material, including journals that suggest one of Washington's associates, a man whose descendants remain politically prominent, may have secretly communicated with British intelligence during the war. Dr. Winters's eyebrows rose. That would be explosive, academically speaking. May I ask which family? I'd rather not say just yet, Nathan replied. I want to ensure the documents are secured before any specific allegations become public. She nodded in understanding. A wise precaution. Historical discoveries with political implications can sometimes disappear if the wrong people learn of them prematurely. She handed him a card with her private cell phone number. I'd be willing to help authenticate and properly preserve these materials, either through my university or through national institutions with appropriate security protocols. Whatever you decide, these documents deserve careful handling and scholarly attention. As Nathan drove back to the farm, he felt a weight lifting. Dr. Winters seemed trustworthy and professionally rigorous, someone who could help navigate the complex intersection of historical significance and political sensitivity. With her expertise and Sarah Harker's local knowledge, he was building a small circle of allies to help protect Colonel Harmon's legacy. But as he approached the turnoff to Old Mill Road, Nathan noticed a black SUV with government plates parked near the intersection. The vehicle pulled out behind him, maintaining a discreet distance, but definitely following his truck. Someone was watching him, someone with official authority. The stakes of his discovery were escalating, and Nathan couldn't help wondering if he was now caught in the same web of secrecy and surveillance that Colonel Harmon had navigated nearly 2.5 centuries earlier. The abandoned farm that had been his desperate last resort was now the center of a historical mystery with potentially far-reaching consequences. Whatever happened next, Nathan was determined to ensure that the truth Colonel Harmon had preserved would finally come to light, no matter whose legacy it might threaten in the process. The black SUV with government plates continued to follow Nathan at a discreet distance as he drove toward the farm. Instead of turning onto his property, he made a split-second decision and continued past, watching in his rearview mirror as the vehicle slowed near his driveway. The driver, a man in a dark suit, appeared to speak into a radio before continuing to follow Nathan's truck. This was no coincidence. Someone with official authority was surveilling him, and Nathan doubted. It was standard procedure for all new property owners in the area. Word of his discovery, or at least suspicion of it, had clearly reached beyond Senator Phillips. Nathan drove to the small general store at the crossroads, parking in plain view of the road. The SUV passed slowly, then parked across the street. At a safe distance, inside the store, Nathan picked up a few basic supplies while considering his options. He needed to get back to the farm without leading his tail directly to the hidden chamber. As he paid for his items, Nathan struck up a conversation with the cashier, a young man who looked bored with his small-town job. "Is there a back exit?" Nathan asked quietly, sliding an extra 20 across the counter. "Got an ex-wife's lawyer following me trying to serve papers." The clerk glanced at the money, then nodded slightly. "Storage room. Door leads to the alley. My truck's back there. Blue Ford with a dent in the tailgate. Keys are under the mat if you need to borrow it. Just leave it at Murphy's bar before closing." "Thanks," Nathan replied, genuinely grateful for the small-town willingness to help a stranger in need. "I'll make sure it gets back safely." He slipped out through the back and located the truck. Minutes later, he was driving away. On a side road, no government SUV in sight. Nathan took a circuitous route back to his property, approaching through the neighboring Harker Farms access road after sending Sarah a quick text explaining he needed to cross her land. Sarah met him at the property line, her expression concerned. "Government types asking questions in town," she said without preamble. "Something about historical preservation assessments, but nobody ordered any official evaluation. They followed me from Harrington University," Nathan explained. "Black SUV, government plates. Any idea who they might be?" "Could be State Historical Commission, but they usually announce their visits. Could also be federal. There's been talk about expanding National Registry protections in this area." She studied his face. "Or it could be someone connected to Senator Phillips. He has friends in various agencies." "I need to get back to the farmhouse without being noticed," Nathan said. "Mind if I leave this truck at your place and go through the woods?" Sarah nodded. "Take the old cattle path. It follows the creek before cutting up toward your back fields. Hardly anyone knows about it anymore." The path was overgrown but still visible, winding through dense trees alongside a small stream. As Nathan made his way carefully toward his property, he reflected on how quickly his situation had changed. Just days ago, he had been a desperate man with nothing but a truck and his last dollars. Now he was evading government surveillance, while protecting historical secrets of national importance. Strangely, despite the stress and uncertainty, Nathan felt more alive than he had in years. The lawsuit that had destroyed his business had left him feeling powerless, a victim of circumstances beyond his control. But here, now he was making active choices, taking responsibility for something bigger than himself. There was purpose in his actions, meaning in his decisions. The path emerged from the woods near the old orchard. Nathan approached the farmhouse cautiously, staying close to outbuildings and using them as cover. The property appeared deserted, but he noticed fresh tire tracks near the barn. Someone had been there during his absence. Inside the house, Nathan immediately checked the kitchen. The root cellar trap door appeared undisturbed, still secured, with the replacement padlock he had installed. But something felt wrong. The air smelled different, cologne perhaps, or aftershave, lingering faintly in the otherwise musty house. Someone had been inside. Whether they had found the hidden chamber was unclear, but they had definitely searched the property while Nathan was away. Urgency rising, Nathan secured the doors and windows before carefully opening the root cellar. The hidden door mechanism worked as before, revealing the secret chamber intact. A quick inventory confirmed that nothing had been taken. The documents, artifacts, and Colonel Harmon's journals remained exactly as he had left them. Relief washed over him, followed quickly by determination. The surveillance and search confirmed his suspicions. These historical materials were indeed as significant as he believed, and others were actively seeking them. He needed to move quickly to protect them properly. Nathan gathered the most crucial documents, the coded journal, Washington's letters, and the evidence of William Phillips's treasonous activities, and secured them in a waterproof pouch. The remaining materials he carefully repacked in their original containers, ensuring the hidden chamber looked undisturbed should anyone else discover it. As darkness fell, Nathan contacted Dr. Winters, keeping his message vague but urgent. Need to meet sooner than planned. Concerns about security of materials discussed. Please advise on secure location. Her reply came within minutes. University Special Collections has secure intake protocol. Can arrange private assessment tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. service entrance. Bring only what you're comfortable having professionally evaluated. Nathan spent a restless night, alternating between watching the property from different windows and reviewing his photographs of the documents. No vehicles approached, but twice he observed flashlight beams moving along the edge of the woods. Someone was maintaining surveillance from a distance. By dawn, Nathan had formulated a plan. He contacted Sarah, explaining that he needed to leave the property discreetly for a meeting at the university. She agreed to create a diversion by arriving at his farm with several workers, supposedly to help with urgent roof repairs before an approaching storm. "Give me 20 minutes to get them assembled," she texted. "They're good people, won't ask questions. Will make enough noise and activity to cover your departure." True to her word, Sarah arrived with 3 farmhands and a truck loaded with roofing materials. As they noisily set up ladders and unloaded supplies, Nathan slipped out the back door with his document pouch and made his way through the orchard to the cattle path. Sarah had left her truck at the property line with the keys under the mat, just as promised. Nathan drove carefully along back roads, constantly checking for any sign of the government SUV. The route to Harrington University took nearly twice as long this way, but he arrived undetected at the service entrance precisely at 8 a.m. Dr. Winters was waiting, accompanied by an elderly gentleman she introduced as Dr. Marcus Abernathy, the university's head archivist and an expert in Revolutionary-era documents. "Mr. Parker," Dr. Winters greeted him, her expression serious. "After our meeting yesterday, I consulted with Dr. Abernathy about the materials you showed me. The potential, historical significance warranted his immediate involvement." "Can he be trusted?" Nathan asked bluntly, still holding the document pouch close. The older man's eyes twinkled. "An appropriate question, given the nature of Colonel Harmon's work. I've dedicated 50 years to preserving American history, Mr. Parker, particularly the often overlooked intelligence operations of the Revolutionary. Period. Whatever you've discovered, I assure you my only interest is in proper historical documentation." Something in the archivist's manner, a combination of professional dignity and genuine passion for history, reassured Nathan. He followed the professors through service corridors to a secure examination room in the university's Special Collections Department. "This room is used for assessing potentially valuable acquisitions," Dr. Winters explained. "No recording devices, controlled access, and proper conservation equipment." She gestured to the archival quality table in the center of the room. "We can examine your materials safely here." Nathan carefully unpacked the documents he had brought, the most significant pieces from the hidden chamber. Dr. Abernathy donned cotton gloves before handling anything, his experienced touch reverent as he examined each item. "Extraordinary," he murmured, carefully unfolding a letter from Washington. "The provenance is clear, the materials consistent with the period." He looked up at Nathan. "These are undoubtedly authentic. May I ask how you came into possession of them?" Nathan explained about the hidden chamber beneath the Harmon farmhouse, describing its construction and the full extent of its contents. Both professors listened with growing excitement. "A purpose-built Revolutionary War intelligence vault," Dr. Winters breathed. "Preserved intact for nearly 2.5 centuries. It's unprecedented." and potentially explosive given the content about William Phillips, Dr. Abernathy added, examining the coded journal entries Nathan had photographed. The Phillips family has maintained their ancestors' reputation as a steadfast patriot for generations. Evidence of his communications with British intelligence would dramatically alter that narrative. That's why I'm concerned about security, Nathan explained. Senator Richard Phillips has shown unusual interest in the property, and now there's government surveillance. I believe they're searching for these documents. Dr. Abernathy nodded gravely. Not surprising, historical legacy is powerful currency in political circles. The Phillips family has leveraged their revolutionary heritage extensively. He carefully returned the documents to the table. These materials require immediate professional conservation and security. Would you consider allowing the university to properly preserve them while maintaining your ownership rights? What would that involve? We would create archival quality storage for each item, digitize everything for scholarly access, and secure the originals in our climate-controlled vault, Dr. Winters explained. You would retain ownership, with the university serving as custodian. We could draw up a formal agreement that protects your rights while ensuring academic access. Nathan considered the offer. It seemed the best immediate solution for protecting the documents, but he was reluctant to remove everything from the hidden chamber. Colonel Harmon had created that space specifically to preserve these materials. There was something meaningful about maintaining at least some of them in their original location. What about selective conservation, he suggested. The most historically significant documents preserved here, with the rest remaining in the chamber. And I'd want guarantees about how and when the materials would be made public, especially regarding the Phillips connection. A reasonable compromise, Dr. Abernathy agreed. We could prioritize the most fragile items and those with greatest historical impact. As for publication protocols, we would establish strict academic standards for access and release of information. They spent the next 2 hours creating a detailed inventory and conservation plan. Dr. Abernathy's expertise proved invaluable. He immediately recognized the historical significance of certain documents that Nathan had overlooked and suggested. Conservation priorities based on physical condition and content. By midday, they had drafted a formal agreement. The university would take temporary custody of 20 key documents for immediate conservation, with Nathan retaining ownership and final authority over publication. A team of vetted experts would visit the farm to assess the hidden chamber itself as a historical site, with potential designation as a protected historical resource. This will provide legal protections for both the property and its contents, Dr. Winters explained. Once officially designated, neither Senator Phillips nor any government agency could seize or disturb the site without proper academic oversight. Nathan signed the agreement, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The documents would be professionally preserved, the hidden chamber protected, and Colonel Harmon's legacy secured through proper historical channels. There's one more thing you should consider, Dr. Abernathy said as they prepared to return the documents to secure storage. These materials don't just represent historical facts. They represent Colonel Harmon's moral choice to preserve truth for future generations, even when revealing that truth would have been politically complicated in his own time. "What are you suggesting?" Nathan asked. "That perhaps your discovery of these materials now, when our nation is again grappling with questions of loyalty, truth, and historical reckoning, isn't mere coincidence." The elderly archivist smiled gently. Colonel Harmon preserved these truths for a time when they could be properly understood and contextualized. Perhaps that time is now, and perhaps you are the custodian he was waiting for. The notion struck Nathan deeply. He had purchased the abandoned farm out of desperation, a last-ditch effort to secure basic shelter. Yet that desperate act had placed him in the path of historical significance, making him responsible for truths long hidden. As he drove back toward the farm, taking the same circuitous route to avoid surveillance, Nathan reflected on how profoundly his life had changed. In just a few days, the man who had lost everything in a lawsuit, who had been sleeping in his truck counting pennies, was now the custodian of Revolutionary-era secrets that could reshape understanding of America's founding. There was something powerfully redemptive in that transformation. His construction career had ended in financial ruin and public humiliation, but this new role, preserving historical truth, honoring Colonel Harmon's legacy, offered a different kind of purpose. It wasn't about rebuilding his bank account, but about contributing to a more honest national narrative. When Nathan reached Sarah's property line, he found her waiting by the cattle path. Her expression was tense, and she immediately approached his truck as he parked. "We've got trouble," she said without preamble. "While you were gone, Senator Phillips arrived with 2 men he introduced as state historical preservation officers. They presented a court order to inspect the property for historically significant artifacts at risk of deterioration." Nathan's stomach dropped. "Did they find the root cellar?" "No, I kept them occupied in the main house and barn, insisting they wait for your return before examining any other areas. But they're still there, and they're getting impatient." "The university agreement should provide legal protection," Nathan said, pulling out his copy. "It establishes legitimate academic oversight for any historical materials on the property." Sarah scanned the document quickly. "This helps, but Phillips won't back down easily. He's been obsessed with the Harmon place for years." She looked up at Nathan. "What exactly did you find in that hidden chamber?" Nathan hesitated, then decided Sarah had earned his trust. He explained about Colonel Harmon's intelligence work, the evidence against William Phillips, and the hidden chamber's purpose as a secure repository for sensitive Revolutionary War documents. Sarah listened intently, her expression changing, from curiosity to understanding. So that's why Eleanor was so protective of the property. She knew what was hidden there. "It seems likely," Nathan agreed. "The chamber was designed to be known only to the Harmon family line. Eleanor must have been the last keeper of the secret. And now you," Sarah said quietly, "a stranger who happened to buy an abandoned farm at auction." "Maybe not just happened," Nathan replied, remembering Dr. Abernathy's words. "Maybe there's purpose in how things unfold, even when they seem like desperate last chances." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Well, purpose or chance, you've got a senator and 2 state officials waiting at your farm. We should head back together. My family has been neighbors to the Harmons for generations. If anyone questions your right to protect that property's history, they'll have to go through the Harkers too." The solidarity in her offer touched Nathan deeply. He had been alone in his struggles for so long, fighting the lawsuit, losing his company, living in his truck. Now, in this rural community he'd never planned to join, he was finding allies willing to stand with him against powerful interests. "Thank you," he said simply. "It means more than you know." They drove their separate vehicles back to the farm, where Senator Phillips's sleek sedan and an official state car were parked in front of the farmhouse. The senator himself stood on the porch, his expression tightening as he saw Nathan approach. "Mr. Parker," Phillips called with forced cordiality, "I was beginning to think you were avoiding our appointment." "I wasn't aware we had an appointment, Senator," Nathan replied evenly, climbing the porch steps, "but I'm happy to discuss the historical significance of the property now that I'm here." He introduced Dr. Winter's conservation agreement, explaining that the university had already begun proper academic assessment of the farm's historical artifacts. The 2 state officials, if they were indeed legitimate, examined the document with professional interest. This appears to establish proper oversight, the older official noted. The university's historical preservation protocols meet state requirements. Senator Phillips was clearly displeased. This agreement is very recent, he observed, checking the date. Conveniently established just before our inspection. Timing doesn't invalidate it, Sarah interjected. The Harmon Farm's historical significance deserves professional, academic attention, not political oversight. Phillips turned to her, his practiced political smile failing to mask his irritation. Ms. Harker, I'm not sure this concerns your family. The Harkers and Harmons have been neighbors since the Revolution, Sarah replied coolly. Our families' histories are intertwined, and as a local landowner, I have every interest in ensuring proper historical preservation practices in our community. The confrontation might have escalated further, but at that moment, a new vehicle pulled into the driveway, a university van with Harrington's logo on the side. Dr. Abernathy emerged, followed by two younger colleagues carrying conservation equipment. Ah, excellent timing, the elderly archivist called cheerfully. Mr. Parker, we've brought the conservation supplies as discussed, and Senator Phillips, what an unexpected pleasure. Your family's revolutionary history makes you the perfect observer for this process. I've always found the Phillips connection to the founding era fascinating, particularly the complex relationship between William Phillips and the Continental leadership. The deliberate reference to William Phillips, whose potentially treasonous activities were documented in Harmon's hidden papers, did not go unnoticed. Senator Phillips's expression froze momentarily before he recovered his political composure. I wasn't aware the university had taken an interest in the Harmon property, he said carefully. Oh yes, quite a significant interest, Dr. Abernathy replied, his elderly academic demeanor masking the steel beneath. We've established a formal conservation partnership with Mr. Parker. Revolutionary-era documents of this caliber deserve the highest scholarly standards. Don't you agree? Particularly those that might reshape our understanding of certain founding families. The implied threat was clear. The university now had possession of at least some of Harmon's documents and understood their implications for the Phillips family legacy. The senator was no longer dealing with just Nathan, but with a respected academic institution. After a tense silence, Phillips nodded stiffly. I'll have my office contact the university about coordinating preservation efforts. He turned to the state officials. Gentlemen, it appears the property's historical artifacts are receiving appropriate attention. We can postpone our inspection. As the senator and his entourage departed, Nathan exchanged a knowing look with Dr. Abernathy. The elderly archivist had deliberately used his knowledge of the document's contents to outmaneuver Phillips, establishing academic authority over the farm's historical materials without explicitly revealing their nature. That was masterfully handled, Nathan said once the visitors had gone. Dr. Abernathy's eyes twinkled. In 50 years of academic politics, one learns a few tactical maneuvers. Senator Phillips now understands that any attempt to seize or suppress Colonel Harmon's documents would trigger their immediate publication by the university. Academic, mutually assured destruction, you might say. The university team began setting up conservation equipment in the farmhouse's front room, preparing to properly document the hidden chamber and its remaining contents. As they worked, Nathan stood on the porch with Sarah, watching the autumn sun cast long shadows across the overgrown fields. What will you do with the farm now? She asked. Beyond preserving the historical site, I mean. Nathan considered the question. He had purchased the property simply for shelter, a desperate man's last resort. Now it represented something far more significant, a direct connection to America's founding and a responsibility to honor that legacy. Restore it, he said finally. Not just the house, but the land too. Colonel Harmon built this place as his home after fighting for independence. The least I can do is make it productive again. Sarah smiled, an appropriate tribute, and practical too. 75 acres of good farmland shouldn't lie fallow. She hesitated, then added, "My offer to help still stands. Neighboring farms, looking out for each other and all that." "I'd appreciate the guidance," Nathan replied honestly. "I know construction, not agriculture." Agree. As Dr. Abernathy's team carefully documented the hidden chamber, Nathan realized how profoundly his perspective had shifted. The abandoned farm that had represented rock bottom, the last desperate purchase of a man who had lost everything, now symbolized possibility, purpose, and unexpected connection. He had arrived with nothing but a sleeping bag and the clothes on his back, a man defined by failure and loss. Now he stood as the custodian of American history, the protector of Colonel Harmon's legacy, and the steward of land that had witnessed the birth of a nation. Perhaps this was the true nature of resilience, not just enduring hardship, but finding meaning within it, transforming desperate last chances into new beginnings. The hidden chamber beneath this abandoned farm had preserved revolutionary secrets. For centuries, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring truth to light. Nathan Parker, who had once defined himself by his construction company's failure, now found himself measuring success differently, not by wealth accumulated, but by truth preserved, by land restored, by history honored. His desperate purchase of an abandoned farm hadn't just given him shelter, it had given him purpose. And as the sun set over the Harmon farm, casting the ancient apple orchard in golden light, Nathan felt something he had thought forever lost in the aftermath of his financial ruin. Hope. Not just for his own rebuilding, but for contributing something meaningful to the world, something that would outlast him, just as Colonel Harmon's legacy had outlasted its creator. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to the farm. Dr. Abernathy's team continued their careful documentation of the hidden chamber, while additional experts from the university arrived to assess the structural needs of the farmhouse. Historical preservationists, architectural conservators, and document specialists moved efficiently through the property, transforming the once abandoned farm into a hive of purposeful energy. Nathan found himself constantly torn between observation and participation. Part of him wanted to simply watch in amazement as these professionals meticulously catalogued Colonel Harmon's legacy. Another part, the builder, the doer, itched to take active part in the preservation efforts. "It's your property, you know," Dr. Winters reminded him as they watched a conservation specialist carefully remove a deteriorating map from the hidden chamber. "You're not just an observer here, you're the custodian. These experts are resources, not replacements for your own judgment." The reminder struck home. Nathan had been so overwhelmed by the historical significance of his discovery that he had momentarily forgotten his own agency. Yes, he needed expert help, but ultimately the decisions about the Harmon legacy were his to make. With renewed confidence, Nathan began actively participating in the conservation discussions, asking questions, offering suggestions based on his construction knowledge, and asserting his vision for how the farm's historical significance should be balanced with its potential as a working property. By midday, a clear plan had emerged. The hidden chamber would be professionally preserved as a historical site with controlled academic access. The most fragile documents would be conserved at the university, with digital copies returning to the farm. The farmhouse itself would be restored with attention to historical accuracy, but also upgraded for modern habitation. The best way to preserve historical buildings is to live in them, the architectural conservator explained. Habitation prevents the kind of deterioration you see in abandoned structures. Colonel Harmon built this as a working farm and home, not a museum. Honoring that means keeping it functional. This perspective resonated deeply with Nathan. He didn't want to turn the property into a static historical exhibit. He wanted to revitalize it, to continue the Harmon legacy of productive stewardship. As the university team packed up for the day, promising to return the following morning to continue documentation, Sarah arrived with takeout food from the local diner. "Thought you might need actual sustenance," she said, setting up an impromptu picnic on the porch. "Historical discoveries are exciting, but they don't fill the stomach." Nathan accepted the food gratefully, realizing he hadn't eaten since dawn. "You're a lifesaver. It's been non-stop since sunrise." They ate in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the overgrown fields in amber light. The farm looked different now, Nathan realized. Not just an abandoned property he'd purchased out of desperation, but a place with profound historical significance and future potential. "I've been thinking about your agricultural situation," Sarah said finally. 75 acres is substantial, but manageable for a beginner if you're smart about it. The soil here is good. The Harmons always maintained it well, even in Eleanor's later years. "I wouldn't know where to start," Nathan admitted. "Construction was my expertise." "Start small," Sarah suggested. "Restore the orchard first. Those apple trees just need proper pruning and care to become productive again. Then consider leasing some acreage to established farmers while you learn. My farm could use additional hayfields, for instance." The practical approach appealed to Nathan's builder mindset. Start with manageable projects, build knowledge and skills, expand gradually. "I'd appreciate any guidance you're willing to offer," he said. "This whole agricultural world is new territory for me." Sarah studied him thoughtfully. "You know, there's something fitting about you ending up here. The Harmon farm has always been about transformation. Wilderness into settlement, colony, into nation. Now it's transforming again, from abandonment to renewal, and you're transforming too, from construction to preservation to agriculture." The observation struck Nathan deeply. She was right. His desperate purchase of this abandoned farm hadn't just provided shelter, it had initiated a profound personal transformation. The man who had arrived with nothing but failure and loss was becoming something new, a custodian of history, a steward of land, a partner in preservation. "I never planned any of this," he said quietly. "Buying this place was pure desperation. My last dollars spent on the only shelter I could afford." "Sometimes our most desperate choices lead to our most meaningful paths," Sarah replied. "My grandmother used to say that hope often wears the disguise of last chances." As darkness settled over the farm, Nathan considered how thoroughly his perspective had shifted. The abandoned property that had represented rock bottom now symbolized possibility and purpose. The desperate purchase that had seemed like the end of his options had become the beginning of an unexpected journey, and the hidden chamber beneath the root cellar, Colonel Harmon's carefully preserved legacy, offered a powerful reminder that even the most difficult truths, when protected and passed down with integrity, eventually find their moment to emerge into the light. The desperation that had driven Nathan to spend his last dollars on an abandoned farm had ultimately connected him to something larger than himself, a historical legacy that had waited nearly 2.5 centuries for the right custodian to discover it. As he prepared for sleep that night, in the farmhouse that was gradually becoming his home, Nathan realized that his greatest failure, losing his construction company and financial security, had paradoxically led him to his most significant purpose. Sometimes it seemed we must lose everything we thought defined us before we can discover who we truly are meant to be. 6 months had passed since Nathan Parker purchased the abandoned Harmon farm with his last $200. The property that had once represented rock bottom, a desperate man's final attempt to avoid homelessness, had transformed dramatically, both physically and in its significance to Nathan's life. The early December morning was crisp and clear as Nathan stood on the newly rebuilt porch, coffee mug warming his hands as he surveyed the changes. The farmhouse, once dilapidated and forlorn, now stood proudly restored. The roof had been completely replaced, the broken windows repaired with period-appropriate materials, and the sagging porch rebuilt to its original specifications. The university's historical preservation team had worked alongside Nathan, ensuring that modern conveniences could be added without compromising the home's historical integrity. But the transformation extended far beyond the buildings. The overgrown fields had been partially reclaimed, with the apple orchard properly pruned and tended under Sarah Harker's expert guidance. A portion of the acreage had been leased to neighboring farms as productive cropland, providing Nathan with modest but steady income while he learned the fundamentals of agriculture. Most significantly, the hidden chamber beneath the root cellar had been properly preserved as a historical site of national importance. After careful authentication and conservation of its contents, the university team had installed climate control systems and proper archival storage, transforming the secret room into a secure repository accessible to vetted researchers. The discovery that had seemed so overwhelming 6 months ago had now been integrated into Nathan's daily life, an extraordinary responsibility that had become part of his new identity as the steward of the Harmon legacy. "Morning, History Guardian," called Sarah as she approached from the direction of her farm, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Brought some fresh eggs and that sourdough bread you liked." Their relationship had deepened over the months of working together on the farm's restoration. What had begun as neighborly assistance had evolved into a partnership that blended her agricultural expertise with his construction knowledge. And somewhere along the way, deeper feelings had developed, though neither had explicitly acknowledged them yet. "Just in time for breakfast," Nathan replied, holding the door for her. The kitchen, once decrepit with hanging cabinet doors and rusted appliances, now featured a blend of restored original elements and carefully chosen modern additions. The massive cast-iron stove had been refurbished and remained the room's centerpiece, though a discreet electric range provided more practical daily cooking options. As they prepared breakfast together with the easy synchronicity of people accustomed to sharing space, Nathan reflected on how much his life had changed. The lawsuit that had destroyed his construction company, once the defining catastrophe of his life, now seemed like a distant memory, a painful but necessary step on the path that had led him here. "The Preservation Committee is coming today?" Sarah asked, sliding perfectly cooked eggs onto plates. Nathan nodded. "Final inspection before the official designation. If approved, the Harmon Farm will become a registered National Historic Landmark." The designation represented the culmination of months of work with the university team, historical societies, and preservation experts. The evidence found in Colonel Harmon's hidden chamber had proven so historically significant that state and federal authorities had fast-tracked the process, eager to protect what Dr. Abernathy had called a revolutionary-era time capsule of unprecedented integrity. "Senator Phillips must be thrilled," Sarah remarked with barely disguised sarcasm. The senator had eventually withdrawn his opposition to the university's involvement, but remained a concerned observer of the process, particularly regarding the documents that implicated his ancestor in treasonous activities. "Actually, he's been surprisingly cooperative lately," Nathan said. "Dr. Abernathy met with him privately last week. I'm not sure what was discussed, but the senator's office issued a statement afterward supporting the preservation efforts. Damage control," Sarah suggested. Once the university authenticated those documents, he must have realized suppression wasn't an option. Better to position himself as a champion of historical truth, however uncomfortable. The pragmatic political calculation made sense, though Nathan suspected Dr. Abernathy had offered some compromise regarding how the William Phillips revelations would be contextualized in historical publications. The elderly archivist understood that historical truth needed to be handled with both scholarly rigor and human compassion. After breakfast, they walked the property, checking the remaining restoration projects before the committee's arrival. The barn had been structurally stabilized, but deliberately left with many of its weathered characteristics intact, what the preservation architect called preserved patina of age. "It's remarkable what you've accomplished in 6 months," Sarah observed as they surveyed the land. "Most people would have been overwhelmed by what you took on." "Most days I was overwhelmed," Nathan admitted. "But there's something about having purpose that pushes you beyond what you think you can handle." And purpose had been the unexpected gift of the abandoned farm. Nathan had purchased the property simply seeking shelter, a desperate man using his last resources to avoid homelessness. What he'd found instead was a responsibility that connected him to something larger than himself, a historical legacy that had waited generations for the right custodian. "The funny thing is," Nathan continued, "I spent years defining success. By the size of my construction company, by contracts won and profit margins. Losing everything forced me to rethink what actually matters." "And what does matter?" Sarah asked, her eyes steady on his face. "Contributing something meaningful, being part of a story bigger than yourself, preserving what's valuable for those who come after." He gestured toward the farmhouse. Colonel Harmon created that hidden chamber because he believed truth mattered, even if it couldn't be revealed in his lifetime. He thought generations ahead. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's what farming teaches you too, thinking beyond your own time. The orchards we plant won't reach full production in our lifetime. The soil we build will benefit farmers decades from now." The arrival of vehicles interrupted their conversation. Dr. Winters and Dr. Abernathy led a group of preservation officials toward the farmhouse, their expressions professional but excited. Today's inspection would determine whether the Harmon farm would receive the historical designation that would protect it permanently. As Nathan greeted the committee and began the formal tour, he felt a profound sense of stewardship. This land, these buildings, the hidden chamber and its contents, all had been entrusted to his care through what had seemed like the worst moment of his life. His financial ruin had led him to purchase this abandoned farm out of desperation, never imagining that decision would connect him to American history in such a meaningful way. The committee members were visibly impressed by the restoration work and the historical significance of the property. When they descended to the root cellar to examine the hidden chamber, their professional demeanor gave way to genuine awe. "You think this has remained undisturbed since the Revolutionary period?" the lead inspector murmured, examining the chamber's ingenious construction. "Colonel Harmon created this specifically to preserve sensitive intelligence documents?" "Yes," Dr. Abernathy confirmed. As Washington's spymaster in this region, he needed a secure location for documentation that couldn't be destroyed, but was too sensitive to be widely known. The chamber's construction shows remarkable foresight. The university had created a preliminary exhibit in the main house, displaying replicas of key documents while explaining their historical context. The committee spent considerable time examining these materials, particularly the evidence regarding William Phillips' communications with British intelligence. "Your handling of these sensitive historical revelations has been admirably balanced," The committee chairwoman told Nathan, acknowledging historical truth while providing appropriate context is exactly the approach landmark properties should take. By early afternoon, the inspection was complete and the committee gathered in the living room to deliver their assessment. Their decision was unanimous. The Harmon Farm would be recommended for immediate designation as a National Historic Landmark, with special recognition for the hidden chamber as a site of exceptional historical significance. "Congratulations, Mr. Parker," the chairwoman said, shaking his hand. "Your stewardship of this property and its historical treasures exemplifies the best traditions of private-public partnership in preservation. The designation will be officially announced next month, though the paperwork begins immediately." After the committee departed, Nathan found himself standing alone in the living room, surrounded by the exhibits detailing Colonel Harmon's legacy. The formal recognition felt like the closing of a circle, from desperate purchase to national landmark, from near homelessness to recognized custodian of American history. Dr. Abernathy approached, his aged face creased in a gentle smile. "A momentous day, Mr. Parker. Not many people can say they've helped rewrite American history before breakfast." Nathan laughed. "I can't take credit for the rewriting. That's all Colonel Harmon. I just happened to be the one who found what he left behind." "Don't underestimate the significance of being the right person at the right moment," the elderly archivist countered. "History is full of discoveries that were mishandled, misinterpreted, or simply buried again because they inconvenienced powerful interests." "Speaking of powerful interests," Nathan said, lowering his voice, "what did you discuss with Senator Phillips last week?" "He's been surprisingly cooperative since your meeting." Dr. Abernathy's eyes twinkled. "Let's just say we reached an understanding about historical nuance. William Phillips's communications with British intelligence will be accurately reported in scholarly publications, but with appropriate context about the complex loyalties of the revolutionary period and the difficult choices faced by colonial families with transatlantic connections." "That sounds diplomatic." "History often is, my boy. Colonel Harmon himself chose not to reveal William Phillips' actions publicly in his own time, understanding that the young nation needed unity more than it needed every uncomfortable truth exposed. He preserved the evidence for future generations, precisely because he trusted that time would provide perspective. This balanced approach resonated with Nathan. His own experience had taught him that failure and success were rarely simple categories, that devastating setbacks could lead to unexpected purpose, that what seemed like an ending could become a beginning. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of activity. University staff continued their work, cataloging artifacts from the hidden chamber, while Nathan and Sarah focused on winterizing the restored orchard. The easy rhythm of their collaboration felt natural now, two people whose unexpected connection had grown from shared purpose into something deeper. As twilight approached, they found themselves back on the porch, watching the winter sunset. Over the fields, the land looked different now, partially tamed but deliberately preserving aspects of its wild beauty, a balance between historical authenticity and renewed productivity. "The national designation changes things," Nathan observed. "The farm will become public in a way it hasn't been before. Researchers, historians, maybe even tourists eventually." "Are you having second thoughts?" Sarah asked, studying his profile in the fading light. "Not second thoughts, just adjusting to the idea that this isn't just my home anymore. It's become something that belongs to our national story." "The best things we steward are never solely ours," Sarah replied. "That's true of land, history, even relationships. We don't own them, we care for them while they're in our hands." The wisdom in her words struck Nathan deeply. His construction company, the business he had thought defined him, had been something he strived to own and control completely. Its loss had devastated him precisely because he had invested so much of his identity in possessing it. But the abandoned farm he had purchased out of desperation had taught him a different approach to success. Not ownership, but stewardship. Not control, but care. Not personal achievement, but contribution to something lasting. As darkness settled over the Harmon farm, Nathan realized how profoundly his perspective had shifted since that desperate day at the county auction. The man who had arrived with nothing but a sleeping bag and his last dollars had found something far more valuable than financial security. He had found purpose, connection, and a place in a story that stretched from revolutionary America into the future. Later that evening, after Sarah had returned to her own farm, Nathan sat at the kitchen table reviewing the committee's official recommendations. The document detailed the historical significance of the property, the importance of Colonel Harmon's intelligence work during the Revolution, and the exceptional nature of the hidden chamber's preservation. One paragraph in particular caught Nathan's attention. The Harmon farm represents not only a remarkably preserved piece of Revolutionary War history, but also exemplifies the potential for historical rediscovery and reclamation. That such a significant historical site remained hidden for centuries, only to be discovered through the dedication of its current steward, reminds us that our understanding of history is never complete, that important truths await those willing to look beyond surface appearances and established narratives. The description struck Nathan as applicable not just to the farm, but to his own journey. His understanding of his life story had been incomplete, focused on the surface narrative of professional success and financial security. Losing everything had forced him to look deeper, to discover aspects of himself that had remained hidden beneath that limited definition of achievement. A knock at the door interrupted his reflections. Nathan opened it to find Dr. Winters standing on the porch, holding a small package. "Sorry to disturb you so late," she said, "but I thought you'd want to see this immediately." The conservation team completed their analysis of the coded journal's final pages today. Inside the package was a printed translation of Colonel Harmon's most private writings, the sections that had been encrypted beyond the simple substitution cipher used in the rest of the journal. The university's cryptography experts had finally broken the more complex code. "The content is remarkable," Dr. Winters said, her academic composure giving way to genuine excitement. "Colonel Harmon's final entry suggests there may be additional materials hidden elsewhere, what he calls the complete account of the intelligence operations during the war." Nathan scanned the translated pages with growing amazement. The decoded text referenced secure secondary locations and distributed evidence to ensure that critical historical truths would survive even if the primary hidden chamber were discovered and compromised. Colonel Harmon, it seemed, had been even more strategic than they had initially realized. He mentions trusted allies whose descendants will preserve what I entrust to them, Nathan read aloud. Could these materials still exist? If they do, they'd be scattered among the descendants of Harmon's revolutionary colleagues. Dr. Winters pointed to a specific passage. He mentions Harker, Wilson, and Montgomery as families who received portions of the complete record. "Harker, as in Sarah's family?" Nathan asked, his pulse quickening. "Possibly. The Harker farm adjoins this property, correct? Colonel Harmon's final entry suggests he divided certain sensitive materials among his most trusted associates, with instructions for preservation across generations." The implications were staggering. If Harmon had distributed additional historical materials among neighboring families, the discovery in the hidden chamber might be just the beginning of a much larger historical recovery. "I'll speak with Sarah tomorrow," Nathan said. "If her family received materials from Colonel Harmon, she might know something, or at least know where to look on their property. After Dr. Winters departed, Nathan returned to the kitchen table. The translated pages spread before him. Colonel Harmon's strategic thinking impressed him anew. The revolutionary officer hadn't just preserved historical truth, he had created redundant systems to ensure that truth would eventually emerge, regardless of attempts to suppress it. There was something profoundly inspiring about that level of foresight and commitment to principles. Harmon had understood that some truths might not be recognized or accepted in his own time, but would be essential for future generations. He had trusted that eventually the right people would discover what he had hidden and would use that knowledge responsibly. Nathan slept fitfully that night, his dreams filled with revolutionary soldiers and hidden documents. He woke before dawn, the first light barely visible on the horizon, with a sudden conviction that he needed to check something in the orchard. Colonel Harmon's coded journal had mentioned the witness trees several times, old growth trees that marked property, boundaries or significant locations. Nathan had assumed it was simply historical terminology, but now he wondered if it might be more literal, if certain trees on the property might themselves serve as markers for hidden materials. The oldest apple trees in the orchard dated back at least a century, but historical records indicated that some trees on the property had been planted during Colonel Harmon's lifetime. Sarah had pointed out 3 massive oak trees along the eastern boundary that she believed were original to the property's settlement. Nathan dressed quickly and grabbed a flashlight, though the growing dawn made it almost unnecessary. The December morning was cold, his breath forming clouds in the crisp air as he made his way to the ancient oak trees. The first 2 trees showed no obvious signs of disturbance or marking, but as Nathan approached the third oak, he noticed an unusual pattern in the bark about 6 feet up the trunk. Weathered by centuries of growth, what might once have been clear carving had become subtle contours in the bark, but still faintly visible was a simple symbol, an eagle with 13 stars. The same symbol that had marked the hidden stone in the root cellar. Heart racing, Nathan examined the ground around the oak tree. If this was indeed one of Harmon's markers, there might be something buried nearby. No obvious disturbances were visible, but the area between the tree's massive roots formed a natural hollow that seemed promising. Nathan returned to the barn for a shovel, then began carefully removing soil from the hollow. About 2 feet down, the shovel struck something solid. Further careful excavation revealed a small iron box, roughly the size of a modern safety deposit box, its surface corroded but intact. The box was sealed but not locked, the lid secured with a simple iron clasp that had partially fused with rust. Nathan worked it carefully until it gave way with a metallic groan. Inside, protected by oilcloth that had remarkably preserved its contents, was a leather portfolio similar to those found in the hidden chamber. With trembling hands, Nathan opened the portfolio. It contained a different type of document than those in the main collection. These appeared to be personal letters rather than official communications, primarily correspondence between Colonel Harmon and various figures not mentioned in the previously discovered materials. One letter in particular stood out. It was from Colonel Harmon to Corporal David Harker, presumably Sarah's ancestor, and referenced materials entrusted to your family's care and documents too sensitive for centralized storage. The letter confirmed what Dr. Winters had suggested. Colonel Harmon had indeed distributed portions of his intelligence archive among trusted associates. Nathan carefully returned everything to the portfolio and made his way back to the farmhouse. The sun had fully risen now, illuminating the restored property in clear winter light. He placed the newly discovered materials on the kitchen table and called Sarah. "I need to show you something," he said when she answered, "and I need to ask you about your family's connection to Colonel Harmon." Sarah arrived within the hour, her expression curious as Nathan explained about the decoded journal entries and his morning discovery by the oak tree. "So you think my family might have received similar materials?" she asked, examining the letter to Corporal Harker. "It seems likely. Colonel Harmon appears to have trusted your ancestor with certain sensitive documents, possibly things he considered too dangerous to keep in one location." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, "There's a family story about a hidden compartment in our original farmhouse foundation. It was mentioned in my grandmother's journal, something about the old stones that hold more than the house. Have you ever looked for it?" "No. It seemed like just another family legend, but now—" She looked at the letter again. "This changes things. If Colonel Harmon really did entrust materials to my ancestor, and if those materials have been preserved somewhere on our property, the implication hung in the air between them. The historical discovery that had transformed Nathan's life and the abandoned farm might extend beyond this property, might, in fact, be just one piece of a deliberately distributed historical archive, spanning multiple properties and families. "We should talk to Dr. Abernathy," Nathan suggested. "If Colonel Harmon distributed materials among several families, we might be looking at a coordinated historical recovery effort across multiple properties." The possibility was both daunting and exhilarating. What had begun as one man's desperate purchase of an abandoned farm was expanding into something that might reshape understanding of Revolutionary War intelligence operations and the founding period of American history. As they prepared to contact the university team, Nathan was struck by how thoroughly his life had transformed in just 6 months. The financial ruin that had forced him to spend his last dollars on this abandoned property had led him to a purpose and significance he could never have imagined. "It's strange," he said to Sarah as they waited for Dr. Abernathy to return their call. "6 months ago, I thought losing my company was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was defining myself by that failure, seeing only what I'd lost. And now," Sarah prompted, "now I understand that some journeys can only begin when others end. If I hadn't lost everything, I would never have found this place, never discovered Colonel Harmon's hidden chamber, never connected with you and this community." Sarah smiled, her eyes warm. "Sometimes rock bottom is just the foundation for something better." The wisdom in her words resonated deeply with Nathan. His rock bottom, living in his truck, down to his last dollars, desperate enough to buy an abandoned farm no one else wanted, had indeed become the foundation for something he couldn't have built otherwise. A life defined not by financial success, but by purpose, connection, and contribution to something lasting. The phone rang, Dr. Abernathy returning their call. As Nathan explained their discovery and the possibility of distributed historical materials across multiple properties, he could hear the elderly archivist's excitement growing. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Abernathy said when Nathan finished. "Colonel Harmon's strategic thinking was remarkable, creating a distributed archive to ensure historical truth would eventually emerge, regardless of attempts to suppress it." They arranged for the university team to visit both properties the following day to begin a coordinated investigation. As Nathan hung up, he couldn't help but smile at the continuing unfolding of what had seemed 6 months ago like a desperate, last chance. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked, noticing his expression. "I'm thinking about how differently things look depending on where you stand," Nathan replied. 6 months ago, I saw an abandoned farm that nobody wanted. Now I see the deliberate design of a Revolutionary War intelligence officer who created a system to preserve truth across centuries. And 6 months ago, I saw a desperate city guy who didn't know the first thing about farming," Sarah added with a teasing smile. Now I see a steward of history who's bringing new life to land that's been in my community for generations. The mutual acknowledgement of their changed perspectives hung in the air between them, carrying implications beyond the historical discoveries. Their partnership had evolved over these months of working together, growing from neighborly assistance into something neither had anticipated but both now recognized. As winter light filled the restored farmhouse kitchen, Nathan reflected on the winding path that had led him here. The financial collapse that had once defined him now seemed like merely one chapter in a much larger story, a necessary detour that had ultimately connected him to this land, this historical legacy, and this unexpected partnership. The abandoned farm he had purchased with his last desperate dollars had become not just a home, but a mission. A place where historical truth long buried was finally emerging into the light, where past and future converged in a story still unfolding. Outside, snow began to fall gently, dusting the restored buildings and the ancient oak trees that had stood witness to centuries of American history. Nathan Parker, once defined by financial ruin, now stood as the custodian of that history. Proof that even our most desperate choices can lead us to purposes we could never have imagined if we have the courage to follow where they lead. The journey that had begun with his last $200 spent on an abandoned farm nobody wanted had become something far richer than financial recovery could ever have been, a contribution to America's understanding of its own founding, a restoration of land long neglected, and the beginning of connections that promised to outlast the difficulties that had made them possible. In the end, what seemed like rock bottom had indeed become the foundation for rebuilding, not just the abandoned farm, but a life rich with purpose, meaning, and unexpected possibility. Nathan's desperate last chance had become his greatest discovery. That sometimes we must lose everything we thought defined us before we can discover who we truly are meant to be. As he and Sarah began planning the expanded historical investigation, Nathan felt a profound sense of gratitude for the failure that had led him here. The abandoned farm that had represented his desperate last resort had become the gateway to his most meaningful contribution. Proof that our lowest moments often contain within them the seeds of our greatest purpose, if only we have the courage to plant them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.